This has been a production of Inattentive ADHD Coalition. Check us out at adhd.org and see how you can help us by donating or by spreading awareness about inattentive ADHD. Thank you.
Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Cynthia Hammer in Seattle. Cynthia, tell us about your new book, Living with Inattentive ADHD.
It's been an exciting journey, even though it was a long journey. I actually got the book written 2 years ago, and it took this long for the publisher to release it. But it's become a bestseller on Amazon, and it continues to sell well. I don't know, what more could I ask for?
That's fantastic. You're 79 now, and this is your first book. What inspired you to write it?
I can't say I was inspired to write. COVID was starting, and I thought, this is something new and interesting. Why don't I write a memoir for my children? I made a commitment to write every day, and I ended up with 55,000 words. And I thought, maybe this could even be better. I hired a developmental editor, and he threw out a lot of the words, so I was back to 40,000. But he's the one who told me this should be a book about your ADHD. He said to make the book interesting, it should be a hero's journey, so that I'd go from having a problem, which is true, and then getting diagnosed, and then my life improved. He had me write a lot more new material, and then the book to be 60,000 words. People ask, how did you remember so many things when I have a terrible memory? Shortly after I got diagnosed in 1992, I started a different nonprofit called ADD Resources. We put out a monthly magazine, and I was writing articles for that. I had saved all those articles, so a lot of those got incorporated into the book.
I'm so impressed that you got Penguin Random House as a publisher. It's on the book. It looks very impressive. But you had never written anything before. You're writing this family memoir, and then it turns into the ADHD hero's journey. What was it like for you to start writing like that?
It was actually fun because during COVID, there was a website called Readsy. You could enter your writing in there, and it would give you prompts on how to improve it. By taking classes at Readsy and by entering my writing in the Readsy webs, I learned about filler words, about length of sentence, how to write descriptions. You don't have someone walk in a room and not describe what the room is like. I learned how to write dialogue. People with ADD, we love to learn new things, and I love learning how to write better. It was just challenging.
That's very cool. But talking about your ADHD, you weren't diagnosed until you were 49 years old. Mm-hmm. Why did it take so long, do you think?
Actually, I felt I got diagnosed early for people knowing adults had ADHD. I got diagnosed in 1992, and at the time I was diagnosed, I actually thought I was the first adult in the United States to know they had ADHD. I didn't know that it was a thing for adults. I thought maybe I was an aberration. But then I met someone who told me that the first ADHD conference was going to be held in Michigan. I went there. I must have met at least 300 adults who had ADHD. I wasn't the first, but I was in one of the first few adults who were learning they had ADHD.
That's so interesting. What led up to it? Why did you get diagnosed?
We were more aware then that children had ADHD. And although my son that got diagnosed had the inattentive type, the descriptions for inattentive type aren't very clear. They use the word like often. You're not sure what often is, and you're not sure what some of the definitions really mean. It took us about 2 years to decide he had ADHD and took him for a diagnosis. In going to his appointments, I slowly was thinking, maybe I have this. When I finally mentioned it to the pediatrician that was treating my son, I think I have ADHD, he simply answered, you do.
So what did you do after that?
He was called a developmental pediatrician, and I guess He was allowed to treat adults. He treated me for my ADHD. Back then, the only two medicines available were Ritalin that you had to take every 4 hours, or Dexedrine that I think you probably took every 4 hours too. There weren't too many choices. I took Ritalin. Clearly remember my first day on Ritalin. Where I worked, sometimes families would come in and I'd give a tour of the facility. I'd get so involved in giving the tour, I would forget that I had another commitment. But this time, when on Ritalin, someone came in for a tour and I said ahead of time, I'm going to have to leave at 2:30. I have to go pick up my son. And at 2:30, remarkably, I noticed my watch and I said I have to leave.
Prior to that, had you been leaving your son at the school?
I write about that in book. I had several times of not knowing things I should have known. I left a son. He was like a 4-year-old. I left him off at Montessori preschool and drove off. It was a holiday. My son sat there for 2 hours and a neighbor lady noticed him. She's the one that called me to tell me. That was one of the bad experiences. Another bad experience was when my youngest son, in the 5th grade, was going to a school that was about 3 miles from our home. He knew the way there because the YMCA, which we went to often, was close by. His new school was close to that. I thought he was going to take the school bus home. He thought I was going to pick him up. Well, he didn't come home on the school bus. I called the school principal. I called the school bus station, knew where he was. I told my husband that I couldn't find him, didn't know where he was. Now, maybe an hour and a half after school had gotten out, I drove over towards the school, and there he was walking home, very cheerful. When he got in the car, I burst into tears. He couldn't understand why I was crying. I had to pull in a parking lot because I was crying so hard. And the woman pulled up, such a nice person, couldn't speak about a stranger. But she wondered what was the matter, why I was crying so much. I said, I thought my son was lost, but now he is found. Even now, this is over maybe 40 years later, and it's hard to talk about.
I've got some stories like that too. And that is where it gets you the most, where you're taking care of somebody and you're not doing a good job.
You feel like you're a big failure. We finally owned a home. We had moved around a lot. There were these basement steps, cement steps that went down. We had back door steps that came down and a railing that wasn't adequate, so you could easily have fallen from the steps coming down from the back door down these cement steps that led to the basement. I saw this danger and got a plywood board to cover the cement steps to the basement.
That was good.
A few months later, my middle son happened to fall from the back steps onto the plywood board. I could only be so grateful that not my usual ADD self saw this danger and anticipated it. That's one thing that comes into my mind.
Those are the victories.
I don't know. They put a little bit on the other side of the scale that you did something right. You can hang on to those things.
While we're talking about this, I do want to ask you about the bravest story that you wrote in your book, and the one that was particularly moving to me about your daughter. Can you tell us that story?
Because I've already told you my feelings of a parent with my other 2 sons. I'd rather talk about my story of being on my sailboard where I undertook an activity that was beyond my ability and ended up almost dying out at sea. I was only rescued on my sailboard right before the sun went down by the fireboat that works in Puget Sound. That only happened because a man in his telescope noticed me. The waves had become so big that the fireboat could only find me because the man in the telescope was telling me where I was.
Do you also want me to ask about when you were a child, what your symptoms were, and maybe somebody could have seen it?
I don't remember those. That's the problem.
Do you want me to ask some of those standard questions that we've been asking, how your life might have been different?
It's hard. I don't know. I don't know if I would have been a better student. I don't know. I thought I could have been an attorney, but my father only said women should be teachers and nurses. It was my generation. I just don't remember my childhood. I don't have a good memory. So even when I went back to high school reunions, it was very difficult for me because people would come up to me and remember stories about me, and I wouldn't even remember them.
Yeah, I've had that experience. How did
Yeah.
you feel when you got your diagnosis? What was the emotion that came with that?
Oh, it was a lot of shame, a lot of shame. People, especially if they've had recent behaviors, start looking at them and realizing that they were inappropriate. I had a woman I counseled, and she said she remembers being at a staff meeting and they had an agenda, but all of a sudden the topic of fire escapes became so important to her that she hijacked the agenda to say we have to talk about fire escapes. Once she got diagnosed with ADHD, she just was so conscious of the inappropriateness of that behavior. That's what started to hit me. Before, I didn't understand that if I was always asking someone, how do you use the copy machine, that it was going to be irritating to them. I just focused on the fact that I forget how to use it. I don't use it often enough to know. And you're the secretary, your job is to help me run the copy machine. I started to feel like everyone I interacted with could tell I had ADHD, or they could tell I was quirky or tell I was different. That is the part that shamed me because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how I was coming across that made people feel that way. Even recently, I asked a neighbor to write a review for my book. And in that review, he said that he had known me for years and he always thought I was eccentric and quirky. I think he meant it kindly because we're friends, but that was a hurtful thing for me to hear. I had to talk to myself and say, no, it's fine. It's fine that you're eccentric. It's fine that you're quirky. Celebrate the fact that you're different and that people actually value some of the things you bring to groups. Often I'm told you have wonderful ideas, but you have to hang on to the part of yourself that ennobles you because there are going to be other parts where you don't feel as fulfilled.
I personally love your quirkiness, admire your creativity and your amazing thirst for learning. It's been really highlights of my friendship with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
But a lot of people feel relief when they get the diagnosis. Are you saying that you didn't feel any relief, like any burden off your shoulders, knowing it was a disorder?
We didn't talk earlier about my first child's death. When I got diagnosed, I thought that explained her death. I would tell people I never can be happy to know I have ADHD because it came with a reminder that something terrible in my life might have been prevented if I had only known sooner. I had a long grieving process after I got diagnosed. It's a process to heal from your ADD alone and to have this double whammy. It took me a long time. People with ADD often aren't in touch with their feelings. It was about a year after my diagnosis. All of a sudden, one day, I said to myself almost out loud, you've been in a grieving process because I wasn't aware of it. And now I was slowly coming out of it. I was starting to be happy that I was diagnosed and starting to recognize that my behavior, my functioning in life was improving. I was happy I had been diagnosed. People respond differently, I think, when they get diagnosed. Did it come as a complete surprise to you? Or were you suspecting something the matter all along? Sometimes I would observe my son who had been diagnosed. He'd partially clean his room and then stop. He would do a task halfway through. He would be mowing the lawn and run off and the lawn would be half mowed. One time, and I remember this clearly, and I wrote about it in the book, I had gone into the basement. I used to have projects. I would do sewing or try to make something by hand. I like to make things. I saw on the workbench something I had started maybe a month earlier. The pieces for it were all over the workbench. I had totally forgotten about the project. It was the kind of thing that would upset my husband, that it was still there, all apart on the workbench. In that moment, I said, this is something Brian would do. Looking at what he was doing and saying, I do the same thing. That's how I slowly started to recognize my own ADHD. My son got diagnosed, and then for 2 years, I would be thinking, I do that. I do that like my son. At the same time, my evaluation came up at work, and sitting with my supervisor, she was bringing up these things I did and answering her, saying, I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I did that. She was talking about my variable performance. Those things rang a bell for me. This sounds like ADHD. She had a grandson with ADHD, so I said to her, I'm thinking I have ADHD. She said, I think you do. The
And
next time I went with my son to his appointment with the doctor, I said to the doctor, I think I have ADHD. And he said, you do.
got it. Do you think that there was extra baggage of anxiety, depression that comes with ADHD just from making so many mistakes throughout your life? Did you feel that you had that to deal with as well?
I don't. It's surprising that I don't relate to that at all. I know I was sad. I cried for days and days related to my daughter's death. I cried for months, actually, but
It
I
wasn't.
wouldn't say I had a long-term condition of anxiety. I didn't have depression, and I also don't think I masked. I maybe wasn't smart enough to mask. I knew sometimes I just didn't know the proper way that girls function. I remember even with friends going down to Mount Rainier. I wrote about this in the book, but the woman in the stall next to me turned around, faced the toilet, and I could see that one foot disappeared. I'm wondering, what's she doing? I realized she was reaching up with her foot to flush the toilet. I was just astonished. It never would have occurred to me. I just felt like there was all this stuff that women knew that maybe their mothers had taught them. I just didn't know. Women knew stuff that I didn't know. I didn't know how they knew it, but I just felt like I didn't know.
After your diagnosis, you quit being a social worker and went into full-time working with ADHD?
I didn't work with ADHD. I started a nonprofit. And for the first maybe 12 years, I worked for free. I created the organization, grew the organization. We had a newsletter, we had monthly meetings, we had a lending library, we put on conferences with national authorities. I did it, and it worked out well because my husband worked really long hours. I could work on the organization from home. We had an office, but I preferred working at home when the phone wasn't ringing. There weren't people stopping by. I worked better without the distractions. I don't remember your question.
What inspired you to create that foundation?
It sounded like something that was needed. I was an adult with ADHD. I met one other person at this conference in Michigan that had ADHD. I went home and thought, I'm going to try to help other adults that don't know they have ADHD and become a resource for them. It grew from that.
And you were still working as a social worker while you were doing this free labor?
Well, no, I gave up that job. Once I knew I was going to give myself to the nonprofit, there was work involved. We started out with just a simple support group, and then it grew. We had monthly meetings at a larger hall. And then when I decided to make it a nonprofit, I had to figure out the paperwork. We created a booklet called the Adult ADD Reader. I was always thinking of new things to do, and that was very engaging. It was very healing. My writing at the time was almost like journaling about my journey with ADHD. I was sharing my information in the newsletters, so it just all came together.
That's so cool. And you formed a different group after that, a different nonprofit.
I retired from the first nonprofit when I was 67, I think. I trained as a coach, but trying to have my own business, I wasn't successful at that. I have trouble marketing myself. So I was retired for many years. I look back now and don't know how I spent that time because feel really involved now with lots of things to do. During COVID, in writing the book, I went to this website where they talked about an author needed a platform. I thought, that makes sense. I need a place where people can get to know me if I'm going to have this book published. At the same time, in writing the book, I went back to update my knowledge about ADHD. And in doing that, I was at Attitude and read someone's guest blog. She got diagnosed when she was 23, and she's told, just move on, be grateful, now make your life better. She said she couldn't do that because she was stuck in being angry that no one had known earlier. That struck a chord with me, that people with inattentive ADHD, the kind I had, they're still going underdiagnosed. That's what propelled me to start the nonprofit. It was the idea that I needed a platform if I'm going to promote the book. And there's this need of people with inattentive ADHD who are going underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed. I started the other nonprofit. And what was so wonderful about it, it was a totally new experience. The earlier nonprofit, I got tired of the same, every month a newsletter, every year a national conference. It got repetitive. That's one reason I left. I had run out of ideas. But now with the new nonprofit, everything is online. I had to learn so many new things, creating a website, learning about social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, making videos, doing this kind of stuff with Katherine. It's been awesome.
It has. It's been awesome watching you learn. I don't know if I could do all that learning, but it's been awesome watching it for sure.
Yeah, I feel like there's some things that are really hard for me to learn, but other things I'm able to do things quickly. I don't feel
you're not afraid of it. You're not afraid of trying new things.
When we interviewed someone yesterday after you left, I told him that the way I function now is throw out a wide net, trying to make contacts, trying to make something happen. When something comes back working out not the way I want, I don't focus on that. I have these other things that are still going forward. That's how I'm trying to function, not to let myself get bogged down in something that's not working out, but to keep focusing on the things that are working out.
I've heard you several times talk about strategies for not getting swamped in negative self-talk. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I think it's a process. I had gone to a lecture with Selma Freiberg. She was a very famous child psychologist. She had us sit and shut our eyes and welcome someone into the room, have them sit in a chair opposite us, and tell that person in all the ways we loved them and thought they were an outstanding person. I had my mother come into the room and sit opposite me and visualized telling her these things. And Miss Freiberg said, now wave that person goodbye and pretend that you are walking into the room and sitting that chair opposite you. Tell that person how much you admire them and you love them. I was sitting there and I couldn't do it. I struggled and struggled to think of one positive thing I could say about myself. This was before I was diagnosed, before I knew I had ADHD. I was sitting there struggling and struggling. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. And then I'd say, I'm an okay mother, but not all the time. Or I'd say, I'm a good cook, but not all the time. I felt that everyone around me knew I had nothing good to say about myself. When I left that meeting, I said at night, and for every negative thing I'm thinking about myself, like when you review your day, I need to balance it with saying something positive. I don't know if people will relate to this, but at the time the Equal Rights Amendment was there. We were working for equal rights for women. I was saying I have to give equal rights to the things I do well, to the things I don't do well. Somehow just bringing it into my awareness that I was saying negative things helped me in the process of stopping. The other thing, it's an old classic book called Learned Optimism, but he talks about when you do something positive, it's like a flame. Do whatever you can to get that flame to be bigger and bigger. When you do something positive, squeeze as much positive benefits out of it as you can. If something doesn't go well in your life, put that fire out as quickly as possible. Say things to yourself that are going to inspire you to do it better the next time. You don't say, I messed up, I'm going to mess up all the time. You say, this time didn't go so well. What can I do to make it go better? You're always focused on the positive or how you're going to make something positive. I don't know. It's just faded away from my life. And when I hear Katherine sometimes putting herself down, I wish I could teach her this, because it makes such a difference to not be telling yourself negative things.
I know that. No, I think about it a lot. Also, widening the lens. I'll do that with the world. I'll say the civilization is ending, democracy is over. And I have to keep reminding myself that there's a million things happening at once. You can focus on the things that are going to hell, or you can focus on the things that are really going great. There's always great stuff going on.
We have choices. Choices. And you don't have to feel that because you've done it a certain way in the past, that's the way you're going to do it in the future.
No, for sure. Is there anything else you'd like me to ask? What are some things we can do to get people diagnosed earlier? Would you want to talk about that?
The Inattentive ADHD Coalition, and our website is www.adhd.org. Our mission has been that children are diagnosed with ADHD by age 8, and adults with inattentive ADHD are diagnosed readily and correctly when they seek help. But we're working now on a strategic plan, and feel the most effective thing we can do is to advocate that all children get screened for ADHD before they finish the 2nd grade. When a child is diagnosed for ADHD, the parents are recommended to get screened for ADHD. Those two things, if we can implement them on a universal basis, will make a huge difference in preventing the damage that has happened when people go undiagnosed.
That's a great and big goal. What are you doing to pursue it?
We're just in the process of creating the strategic plan. It's based on a book called Traction. We've created the 10-year goal, which is in 10 years, physicians, anyone treating children with ADHD will screen the children. In 3 years, we have a goal that the American Academy of Pediatricians will be making this one of their guidelines. We're working backwards now on the 1-year goal and the 3-month goal. I'll do another video in the future to explain to you where we are. It's been very helpful to us to start honing in on this thing that we think is going to make a huge difference. Children are at least 10% of the population. And we know from research how damaging it is when they don't get diagnosed. Criminality, poor educational achievements, lower employment, domestic violence, suicide, car accidents, injuries, a lot of health problems because of their undiagnosed ADHD. There's plenty of reason these children need to be diagnosed early, and screening is the first step in getting them diagnosed.
Great. Where can we get your book?
My book is supposed to be available wherever you buy books. Go ask for it at your local bookstore. I don't want to promote Amazon, but that's where it's available too. And if you do buy it at Amazon, a review is always helpful. The royalties from the book are going to go just to the Inattentive ADHD Coalition. The royalties are not going to be a huge amount of money. What I think is going to make the most difference is if this book sells really well. That alone is going to make people sit up and pay attention to inattentive ADHD. My book so thoroughly describes all the kinds of behaviors, all the challenges someone has with ADHD that are hidden, that we try to hide. It's a book that is going to help your family finally understand what it is you face when you have ADHD. The book is about helping people to understand this disorder that many people fail to understand.
So it's gone from a memoir for your grandchildren to a personal and political mission. And it's called Living with Inattentive ADHD by Cynthia Hammer. So, Cynthia, you were diagnosed at age 49, and you've said that you got a whole new life after your diagnosis. Can you tell us more about that?
First, when you say that, I got a whole new life, I'm immediately responding. Not that I got a whole new life, I worked for a whole new life, but I understood how to work and in what directions to work. I got interviewed by a columnist for the local newspaper, and she wanted to find out how my life differed after my diagnosis. I really was embarrassed to tell her that the differences were I now put my credit card back where it belonged. I now put my keys in my purse. I hung up my purse in the front hall closet. I knew where it was. I now got to appointments on time and my clothes were presentable. There were so many little things that had changed and added up to a whole new life. It is embarrassing to tell people these are huge achievements when they're things that other people just naturally do. The only thing I told her was I never would have been able to run this nonprofit before my diagnosis. That was something she could understand and relate to.
And the book, writing a book, people without ADHD struggle to write books.
Yes, there is a Facebook group for authors with ADHD. One of their biggest problems is their consistency. They want to write, but they don't find the time to write. They can't persist in writing. So for me, the gift was COVID. What was I going to do during COVID, where in Washington State, you were expected to stay home all the time? I made a commitment that I was going to write every day. Now, people with ADD might say, how could you make a commitment like that? Because I had read about people trying to diet. And if they were going to diet every day and a day they missed and ate chocolate cake, it was not an excuse for them to say, oh, I blew it, I'm off my diet. They had to say, yesterday I went off my diet, but today I'm back on my diet. Knowing that, there were days I didn't write, but I didn't forget about writing. And I told myself, you made a commitment to write every day. You need to get back and write today. That's how I got the book written.
That's great. I think it's great. I think your kids and grandkids will appreciate it all the more for its being so influential in the world.
This has been a production of Inattentive ADHD Coalition. Check us out at adhdh.org and see how you can help us by donating or by spreading awareness about inattentive ADHD. Thank you.